Okay, what about your will? What should that look like? And this is a typical estate plan for a married couple that has a non-taxable estate. I just picked the number 700,000. It doesn't have any real significance. So the first spouse dies, and it's the I love you will. Everything goes to the surviving spouse. I love you, and you get it all. However, if the surviving spouse then needs care, most of the estate is going to have to be spent down in order to become eligible, because the surviving spouse is a single person then, right? So then we're on this side of the screen, and so they can only have $2,000 in assets. So is there a way around the problem? And there is. So what can happen is, since each spouse controls your half of the community property, so you may not have known that, but you don't have to leave your half of the community property to your spouse. Okay? But you want to, or at least you want your spouse to benefit from their half of your half of the community property. So if your will says, when I die, my half of the community property goes into this safe harbor trust for the benefit of my spouse, and my spouse, surviving spouse, cannot be the trustee of that safe harbor trust, because if she's the trustee and the beneficiary, her interest merges. And that means that DSHS or Medicaid will say, well, you're the trustee, you need the care, just write yourself a check and pay for your care. So she can't control it and have the benefit. So she has the benefit, so she has to not have the control. And so the kids or some other trusted party is the trustee of the safe harbor trust. Now, if the surviving spouse is happy and healthy, she's using her income and her half of the community property to enjoy life and go on cruises and go to Las Vegas and whatever is going on. She's buying a new car. If she's running low on money, she can talk to the trustee of the safe harbor trust, say, why don't you buy that car for me, or do whatever needs to be done. But at the point at which this spouse then needs care, the trustee of the safe harbor trust can only pay for goods and services, can't transfer cash money to this person, because remember, they can only have $2,000. So they have spent down. This is their safety net. And then when we're here, the surviving spouse then would be eligible for Medicaid to pay the bill. And the safety net stays out there to pay for things Medicaid might not pay for. Dental issues, or maybe massage therapy, or maybe one of the grandkids is getting married and you want to hire a caregiver and buy tickets and take that person to the wedding or the graduation. And you could do that. Safe Harbor Trust could do that. Let me give you another situation. Suppose we already did the split. Both spouses are alive. One spouse needs care. All the assets transfer to the well spouse. Okay, the spouse who needs care is now eligible for Medicaid and receiving benefits. What happens if the well spouse dies suddenly? Well, if it's the I love you will, it goes back to the spouse who's in care. He's no longer eligible for Medicaid benefits because he has more than $2,000, and so he's going to have to spend down all of those assets. Whereas if the well spouse had a will with a safe harbor trust in it, all the assets are now held by the well spouse. The other spouse that needs care is getting care. The well spouse dies suddenly. All the assets go into the safe harbor trust for the benefit of the spouse who's on Medicaid, and they continue to be eligible for Medicaid. Okay, one more example. So I had a couple that came in, and sometimes couples come in and I call them the TP couples, because they're kind of leaning on each other, and it's pretty cool how frail people can get if they have somebody that loves them and is going through life with them. And so they come in for an estate plan, and we have the discussion, and we decide, well, you probably need a will with a safe harbor trust in it, because if one of you dies, the survivor is not likely to be able to live alone because their support isn't there, right? So I set that up for this couple, and they came back in a few months later, and they said, well, unfortunately, one of us got a terminal diagnosis, and we're pretty far along, and we're probably not going to seek any aggressive care. We're just going to go home with hospice. But we thought we'd check in with you and see if there's anything, that we should do. And so I said, well, since you're not going to get any aggressive care and you're going to go home, it probably, although it's counterintuitive, it probably makes sense to transfer all the assets to the dying spouse. So if we transferred all the assets to the dying spouse, we did that, and that spouse died, and then the surviving spouse couldn't live alone, so he had to go into care. There was no penalty on the transfer to the dying spouse, no penalty for transfer between husband and wife, no penalty for transfer on death. The dying spouse died, all the assets went into the safe harbor trust. The surviving spouse couldn't live alone and went into care, and so all of their assets they had worked for their life were now in the safe harbor trust as the safety net for the benefit of the spouse who was now in care and eligible for Medicaid right away. So granted, most people, when they get that kind of a diagnosis, going to the attorney is probably the last thing they think about, so most people wouldn't do that. And if they didn't, in that story I just gave you, they would end up with just half of the assets being in the safe harbor trust, and then the surviving husband would go into care, would have to spend down his half, and the other remaining half would be in the safe harbor trust. But because they kind of had the forethought, and it worked out that way. But that option is certainly there, and that shows really the purpose of that trust. Yes, sir?
So you would have each one of the spouses have a safe harbor trust will that transfers to the other?
Yes.
Not knowing which one's going to die.
Correct. Correct. I mean, sometimes people come in and they have a diagnosis with a progressive disease, and it's pretty obvious that that's really the way things are going. And in that situation, I may just suggest we do a safe harbor trust for the will of the person who we're presuming is going to be the well spouse. And then the spouse who has the disease is, their will is fine because it's leaving everything to the well spouse anyway, so we might not have to change both wills. Okay, and what about the single person? What does that look like? So in the typical estate plan, you have your assets. If you get to where you need care and you're on the Medicaid safari track, then you're going to have to spend it all down before you can qualify for care. And is there a way around the problem? There is. You have to be a little more, have a little more forethought. But the way it would work is similar to what I suggested with John and Mary making the gift to the kids, is you gift the money to the kids, the assets to the kids take the money and they put it into a trust for the benefit of mom or dad or mom and dad. And when they make the gift to the kids, that starts the 5-year clock ticking. Okay, and the kids put it into a special needs trust for the benefit of the parent or parents. And the clock is ticking. So as long as the parent lives the 5 years, and then before they get sick, and so they're getting sick after 5 years, when you fill out the Medicaid application, it says, have you made any gifts or transfers in the last 5 years? You can say no because it's been more than 5 years, right? But what happens if the parent gets sick in year 4 or year 3? What happens if they get sick 3 months after they do this? Okay, then now they're on the safari, right? And so they need money to pay for their care. They don't qualify for Medicaid because they made a gift, right? So what happens then is the trust, either the money can all go back to mom and begin to pay her care, or the trust just begins to pay her care. Makes more sense to have the trust pay for her care. If it's a large enough trust, it's going to pay for the care for the 5 years, get past the 5 years, and there might be some money left in the trust. Certainly if the person doesn't get sick till year 4, it's likely there's going to be money in the trust. It gets them past year 5, and they can then make the application and check the box that it's been more than 5 years. But what happens if they get sick early on and there's not enough money to get through the 5 years? So the trust starts paying for care in year 1 and you run out of money in year 4. What happens? Well, because if you undo the gift, the ineligibility goes away. A certain amount was given to the kids, that amount was put in the trust, that amount now was spent on mom's care, so the gift was returned. All of the money that was given was used to pay for mom's care. So when the money is gone, was spent on mom's care, at that point you could apply for Medicaid and still check the box that no gifts were made because the gift was undone because all of the value of the gift was used to care for mom. Okay, so there's the only downside, I guess, well, there isn't, because you would have had to spend all that money for care anyway, right, if mom had kept it all along.